He came home so quietly that even the hallway clock seemed to hush itself, as if the house understood it was about to be told something it needed to hold with both hands. He closed the door carefully, laid his backpack down as though it might bruise, and glanced toward my room. I pretended to keep reading, but I was watching the way his shoulders moved, tensed, then set, like someone who'd rehearsed 100 times and finally decided to go on stage. "Dad," he said, not loudly, not timidly, just steady. "I need to show you something. And I need you to believe me before I explain it." The words were ordinary, but the way he said them was not. He wasn't asking for permission. He was offering a secret. He walked past the kitchen without opening the fridge, ready strange for a teenage boy and headed for the garage. I followed, tray of doubts clattering inside my chest. He flipped on the bare bulb and reached for the old metal toolbox that had belonged to my father, the one we never used except to fix wobbly chairs and the occasional loose hinge. His fingers moved through the sockets and screwdrivers with a familiarity that startled me. "You've been in here?" I said, trying to keep accusation out of my voice. He didn't flinch. "Every Thursday night," he said, "for months." He pulled out a tiny box of screws, a roll of electrical tape, a small soldering iron I hadn't seen in years. Then he opened his backpack and emptied it onto the workbench. 2 cracked radios, a loose drawer handle, a broken pair of eyeglasses. With one arm missing, a toy truck with a dangling wheel, a music box whose key had snapped. It looked like a yard sale for lost causes. He lined each item up with careful, almost reverent hands. "These aren't ours," I said, sharper than I meant to. "I know," he replied, and the softness in his tone blew my anger out like a candle. "They belong to people who stopped believing things could be fixed." He told me he'd started with a neighbor's lamp that flickered like a tired star. The owner, Mr. Singh, had said, "It's not worth it, throw it out." But my son watched 3 tutorial videos, stripped a wire, soldered a connection, and the light steadied. After that, he began walking home a different route, picking up the city's quiet confessions, a wobbly stool, a radio that only whispered, a clock that had lost its courage to tick. He put a handwritten note on our gate repair night. "Leave something. Leave a note. Leave your hope," then took it down before I woke up because he didn't want to be told it was too much, too risky, too unrealistic. People started trusting. "The darkness on our porch," he said, not smiling. "They left what they couldn't throw away yet." He showed me a second notebook. Not the one for school, but the one he had been living out of. Parts, lists. Tiny diagrams, names, and stories beside each item. Mrs. Delgado's music box. It plays my wedding song. The mechanic's radio. Dad listened to cricket on this. The little toy truck. He won't sleep without it. My son had sorted the broken not by what they were, but by who they mattered to. I touched the music box key. It snapped stem like a sentence cut off, mid-word. "Why didn't you tell me?" Kay asked, and the question carried more weight than I intended. He ran his thumb along the edge of the workbench where my father had once carved a shallow groove to remind himself not to drop small screws. "Because I needed to know it was real before I asked you to help," he said. "I thought if I told you too soon, you'd make it safe instead of true." He wasn't wrong, and the knowledge of it pressed on me. How many times had I averaged his edges, smoothed his daring into something that fit my schedule? I looked at his hands. Faint nicks, a smudge of oil near the nail, the kind of small, honorable damage that comes from making things whole again. He lifted the broken eyeglasses last, the left arm missing, the hinge bent. "These are Mrs. Patel's," he said quietly. "She hasn't read her prayer book in a week. She didn't want to bother anyone." Out of his pocket, he pulled a tiny replacement arm he'd shaped from a thin strip of aluminum and wrapped with heat shrink tubing. "It's not perfect," he admitted, "but it will hold until the new part comes." He met my eyes then. That steady gaze, more grown than boy. "This isn't just about stuff, Dad. It's about telling people they're not disposable. It's about reminding them their stories can still work." He paused, unsure for the first time. I want to open our garage on Fridays. Properly. Lights on, sign up, no money. Just repairs and tea. I can't keep it secret anymore. I need you. Something unclenched in a place I hadn't realized. Was tight. The garage smelled like dust and old metal and, suddenly, possibility. I heard my father's laugh somewhere in the rafters, or maybe it was just memory cracking open. I imagined our quiet house pulsing with small resurrections, the click of a clock finding its beat, the glow of a lamp steadying, a music box that hadn't sung in years offering its tune back to a pair of waiting hands. He had come home quietly, but he had brought a revolution with him, not loud. Not dramatic, but faithful and precise. A revolution made of patience and wire and tea. "Show me," I said, and my voice surprised us both with how ready it sounded. He turned on the soldering iron, placed the music box between us like a prayer, and the thin tip brightened to the color of a sunrise. We spent the rest of that night making a map with tape on the garage floor, intake by the door, triage along the left wall, tools in the center, pickup table by the freezer with arrows marked in chalk like a tiny airport for lost things. He wrote a list on the whiteboard. Tea, biscuits, labels, safety glasses, extension cords, wipes, band-aids. He moved like a conductor who already heard the music the rest of us couldn't. By Friday afternoon, shy line formed on the driveway as if the neighborhood had been waiting for us to flip this particular switch. Mr. Singh arrived with the lamp that started everything, carrying it like a sleeping child. Mrs. Delgado clutched the music box to her chest. A dad and his daughter wheeled in a scooter with a brake that had given up. An older woman, breathless from the walk, held a silent wall clock and whispered, "It stopped when he passed." I wanted to keep time again. We didn't take money. We took stories. My son handed out sticky notes and asked each person to write their name, the object's name, and one memory tied to it. He stuck those notes to the bench above each item like tags in a museum of ordinary miracles. When the kettle clicked, he poured tea with the same care he later used on screws, no bigger than sesame seeds. "It might take a week," he told one man, "but it won't take forever." I watched strangers exhale like someone had loosened a knot in their chests. At first, the work humbled us. Screw head stripped, a plastic tab snapped, a hairline crack masqueraded as a clean break. We learned to stop yanking and start listening. The scooter yielded to patience and a new spring. The lamp wanted a gentle hand and a cord that didn't spark like a bad idea. My son's fingers, nicked and sure, found tiny paths through tiny problems, and every solved riddle sharpened him. When the music box finally sang, Mrs. Delgado covered her mouth and swayed. The garage suddenly big enough to fit a memory of dancing on a kitchen floor with a man who laughed like a radio on a summer night. I felt my father's toolbox grow lighter, as if purpose itself were lifting it from the inside. We made a ritual. Each time something stirred back to life, the owner signed the whiteboard beside a doodled sunrise. By the end of the first evening, we had 6 small sunrises. My son didn't cheer. He wiped the bench, capped the solder, and wrote, "See you next Friday." Leadership, I realized, wasn't loud. 'Twas faithful. Word spread the wholesome way good bread does from hand to hand. The bakery sent a tray of rolls with a note, payment in carbohydrates. A science teacher arrived with safety goggles and 3 curious students who wanted to learn the mathematics of mending. The mechanic from the corner shop lent us a torque wrench and, unasked, stayed to show a boy how to tighten a brake cable. Without fear. People came even when they had nothing that needed fixing. They came to sit in a place where the air felt more possible. Not everyone approved. A neighbor worried about liability. Another muttered about clutter. My son thanked them for caring and taped a sign near the door. Repair at your own risk. Respect and tea guaranteed. It was 11 parts courtesy and 1 part iron. When a fuse finally blew and the garage went dark, the room didn't dissolve. Into complaint, a phone flashlight clicked on, then another. My son laughed softly in the new shadows, reset the breaker, and moved the kettle to a different outlet. We don't quit, he said, not like a slogan, but like a reminder to gravity. The work changed me in ways that couldn't be measured in fixed clocks or glowing lamps. I stopped treating my days like problems to manage and started treating them like broken things that wanted a chance. I found myself calling my sister after a year of silence just to say, I'm sorry about the last time. I oiled the front gate that had squealed for months like it was complaining on behalf of the whole house. I stood longer at the end of the driveway, talking to the man who always kept his headphones in as if avoiding the world on purpose. Bring me anything that doesn't work, I told him. He pointed to his chest, half a joke, half a plea. We have tea for that, I said, and it was only a little ridiculous how true it felt. Around the third Friday, a boy I'd never seen before hovered by the door with a smashed alarm clock. It's okay if you can't fix it, he said. To my son, voice bending. I just want to stop dreading mornings. My son took the clock gently and said, let's make a new sound for the start of your day. He showed him how gears want to meet, how springs prefer patience, how a case closes easier when you don't fight its shape. The boy's face opened like a window. It wasn't the clock that changed. It was his posture while he watched it. Nights, after the last thanks and the last mug, we swept the floor in a rhythm that felt older than the garage moved the dust, gathered the screws, returned the tools to their rooms. My son would look at the growing column of sunrises on the whiteboard and nod as if he were memorizing a prayer. We're not really fixing things, are we? I said once. He thought about it, then smiled. We're reminding people they still. Kenny said it so simply, I wanted to sit down and weep for every year I had spent mistaking cynicism for wisdom. The secret he carried through the door that first quiet evening had stretched its legs. It was no longer a secret, but a way of being. And yet, even as the garage hummed with small victories, I felt a larger ask gathering at the Agiza challenge that would ask us to widen the circle, to move beyond our Friday ritual into something braver and bigger. The question waited like a visitor at closing time, patient and impossible to ignore. By the fourth month, the garage had stopped feeling like just our space and started feeling like a community heartbeat. Every Friday, people came not only with broken radios, toys, or lamps, but also with stories. Some lingered long after their repairs were done, sipping tea, laughing, and talking with neighbors they'd barely known before. A woman who had lived 3 doors down for 10 years admitted she'd never once spoken to the mechanic from the corner. Pun till now. Children who once spent evenings glued to their phones now crowded around my son, learning how to hold a screwdriver properly or how to listen for the faint tick of a clock trying to wake itself. It wasn't just about repairs anymore. It was about reminding people they belonged. But challenges came too. One evening, a man stormed in with a shattered blender and slammed it on the bench. Bet you can't fix this, he sneered, bitterness dripping from his voice. The garage went silent. I held my breath, ready to send him away. But my son simply picked up the blender, examined it, and said calmly, I can't promise it will work again, but I promise I'll try. The man froze, as if he hadn't expected kindness. Later, when the blender hummed faintly back to life, the man's face crumbled, and he whispered, It was my wife's. She passed last year. I just wanted to hear it again. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't empty, it was sacred. I realized then that this little garage had become a sanctuary for more than objects. It was a sanctuary for memories. The city eventually heard about our Friday repair nights. A local reporter came with a camera, capturing my son's small, steady hands at work, capturing the faces of neighbors, rediscovering hope in the whir of a repaired fan or the glow of a working lamp. The article called it *the garage of second chances. I thought my son would be thrilled at the attention, but when I showed him the paper, he shook his head. I don't care if the city knows, he said. I care if Mrs. Patel can read her prayer book again, or if Jordan's scooter lets him ride with his friends. That's what matters. His humility silenced me more than fame ever could. And it was in that humility I learned the biggest lesson. Change doesn't always come with grand speeches or loud movements. Sometimes it comes quietly, one repair at a time, one act of listening, one cup of tea. My son had taught me that life's broken pieces, whether objects, dreams, or people, don't always need replacing. Sometimes they just need someone willing to try. He came home quietly that first night, carrying a secret he was afraid I'd dismiss. But that secret grew into something larger than either of us imagined. It changed not just our garage, not just our neighbors, but me. I had spent years sighing at the news, muttering that the world was falling apart, convinced I was too small to do anything. Now I knew better. I had watched a boy prove that the world doesn't get better through complaints. It gets better through action, however small. And now I want to ask you, if a quiet boy with a soldering iron and a notebook can spark hope in an entire community, what could you do if you stopped hiding your own secret dream? Tell me in the comments, what broken thing in your world would you choose to fix if you dared to begin?